Rock Springs, Wyoming. Here I am. I live here. This is Amber Beck. I'm tuning in, and I wanted to talk about Rock Springs and how I have felt really creeped out by this place for over 15 years. 15 years ago was my first time ever showing up here, so that's why it's been 15 years. There's just a really eerie, unsettled feeling, and since I live here, I kind of want to be able to co-inhabit with this feeling. I don't want to be around creepy things, but I kind of wanted to understand it, so I've been investigating. And there's good reason for it to feel as creepy as it does. The Rock Springs Massacre of 1885. And then I found out about that, and it is exactly why it feels this way. So let's dig in, shall we? All right, let's do it. 10 to 12 hours a day of unpleasant toil, working on the coal mines, lanterns that barely lit enough, left off this stinky smell, and always being covered in soot, bad for your lungs, probably bad for your existence in every way. And there's not much to make you feel better. So of course we have lots of bars, and there has been lots of prostitution, especially back in those days. So salooners and prostitutes were ready to serve. So in the summer of 1875, before the Chinese were into the Rock Springs mines, the miners were paid 5 cents a bushel, and $2.25 for a 10-hour day and $2.50 for a 12-hour day. That was very common wages, and it was considered fair. Goods for these people, though, had to be shipped in from the railroad, which had monopolistic control over the town. From January to June of 1875, anthracite coal miners in Pennsylvania were out on strike, and when their strike failed, their wages were cut along with the wages of Rock Springs miners who did not strike. Instead of it being 5 cents a bushel, it became 4 cents a bushel, making $1.25 per ton. They made $1. That was significantly less. They were led to believe that the company would reduce the price of provisions and clothing to offset the wage reduction. The reduction happened in the summertime, so by fall, having not seen a difference and a reduction in these other amenities that they had, they walked off their jobs because there wasn't proof that they were going to come through for them. And as they walked off their job, they demanded their 5 cents per bushel rate back. And the Union Pacific said, no way, not going to happen. The papers, they gave the impression that things were going to get a little bit rough for the companies that were not keeping a good deal for, like, not taking good care of their employees. They were concerned that the employees were going to get mob-like, worried that the union workers were going to become riotous. The governor didn't have access to militia. He didn't have access to Pinkerton detectives. So he called General George Crook at the request of the railroad. And the next morning, as it says here, the miners awoke to find army tents in neat military rows among their houses. 4 companies of cavalry were sent by Crook with orders to protect Union Pacific property. So 2 companies bivouacked at Carbon County and 2 under the command of Captain Howley at Rock Springs. Then 2 trains arrived with about 150 Chinese strike breakers, house building materials, and carpenters. And the strikers were enraged. They went on strike in protest to the introduction of Chinese labor, but clearly all efforts to bargain with the Union Pacific was hopeless. So in despair, the white miners offered to go back to work at the 4 cents per bushel and $1 per ton rate if the Chinese were sent back, but it was too late. The Chinese were staying. The right to bargain collectively was not recognized, so it wasn't something they were going to get consideration for. Before the year of 1875 had come to an end, there had been 400 Chinese immigrants who had been given to Union Pacific. From that point on, the relationships between the Chinese and the white workers were never completely peaceful before the Chinese massacre. And it seems that nobody's found evidence that Union Pacific had ever tried to make right for anybody on this. They just kept going. Obviously, they've got to feed the pig and get that train going, so that was their priority. And it seems like they didn't really care that much about their employees that they had. It was all about getting it done. And so whatever they had to do, whatever means that meant. So what I'm reading here is that oftentimes they would say the Chinese would provoke fights because that they knew that the company would intercede on their behalf. And that's not the first time I've read that there would be something like, you want me to talkie to your bossy or something, you know, like, and I don't know, maybe because they were protected they could, but I don't know. Also people say that they were peaceful and it was, you know, it wasn't like that. So it's hard to know exactly, like, if people would just say that just to get them in trouble, or maybe maybe the white people felt picked on because they weren't getting precedence over the Chinese. The powerlessness that the white people felt against their conditions for their homes and for their ability to prosper, it just continued to advance the atmosphere of hostility and hatred. And that was for a 10-year period from 1875 to 1885. Okay, so within that 10-year period of time, it was $1 per ton that they mined. And by the time 10 years had gone by, it had gotten to 74 cents per ton. And they knew that any attempt to strike for higher wages was going to be thwarted by the Chinese, who refused to join in such activities. The Union Pacific protected their valuable investment of Chinese strikebreakers, and privileges were given to the Chinese, which the whites resented. The white workers believed that they were being discriminated against in many ways. Over 600 Chinese lived in Rock Springs as the summer of 1885 came to an end, and tension between the races increased. More than 550 Chinese worked for the Union Pacific coal mine, while the white miners numbered less than 300. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the riot. So a dispute over working rooms between 2 white miners and 2 Chinese was the spark that touched off the riot. On September 1st, 1885, Mine Superintendent James A. Evans told miners Isaiah Whitehouse and William Jenkins that they would work in entry number 5 of mine number 6 the next day. Evans said that the rooms would be marked for them to begin the following morning. The rooms were also assigned to 2 Chinese workers next to theirs. The following day, Dave Brookman was acting as pit boss in the absence of Boss Francis. Brookman believed that the 2 Chinese working in the same entry had begun work on their rooms, so he told Whitehouse and Jenkins to take the first rooms that were marked off. By this statement, Brookman meant that Whitehouse and Jenkins should take the rooms beyond those assigned to the Chinese workers. Whitehouse began working in one of the rooms, not knowing that it had actually been assigned to a Chinese miner who had not come to work that day. Whitehouse worked all day getting his charges set in the stubborn rock. With this completed in the afternoon, Whitehouse took the rest of the day off, planning to fire his charges the next morning. Early the following day, Whitehouse and Jenkins returned to find the 2 Chinese in possession of Whitehouse's room. The Chinese had fired the shots and were busy profiting from the work that Whitehouse had done the previous day.